So, where did we leave off last week? Basically left off, the Battle of the Boyne is virtually over. The Jacobites are trying to hold Dunor Hill, but they're being pushed and pushed and pushed, and the Williamites are coming up and they're firing upon their positions and they're taking the positions. The Jacobites, to their credit, they don't retreat in bad order. At this point, they actually retreat in quite good order. And the Williamites are basically, they're holding their own. The Jacobites are retreating in good order, as I say, but the Williamites, both sides haven't lost really that many men. The Jacobites have lost the field because James has left, okay? They've been pushed off the field with the greater numbers of the Williamite army. But the Jacobites haven't lost a substantial amount of men. In both armies, we're only talking about 1,500 casualties here. So it's a very small amount of people lost on both sides. The Williamites have won. There's no two ways about it. The Williamites have won. William has won because James has left the field. But the Jacobites are leaving in good order and they still have a massive army. Not as big as the Williamites, yes, but the Williamites now are going to have to push forward, and this is the problem now, is taking the smaller towns and garrisoning these towns. Every time you garrison somewhere, you take men out of your main army, you put them into these areas, and this causes a shortage of men. Also, William is worried because the French fleet have won a massive battle on the 30th of June off England, off the Bay of Biscay, and they control the sea in a certain respect. His fleet around Ireland, they're going to hold back as much as they can, but the French fleet are just off the coast of Ireland, and he is still worried that Louis may send an invasion force to England, so he wants to keep his men ready in case they have to leave Ireland and go to defend England. There is talk and rumours going around that the Dauphin of France has an army ready of 50,000 men to invade England or Scotland. So James, he believes that the French are still going to support him even more again. James himself has left the battlefield. He's gone towards Dublin. We talked about this last week. He is met in Dublin by Tyrconnell's wife, and he says, my men have ran away. And she said, well, by God, sir, you won the race. So James has proven again that he's untrustworthy of the Irish people's support. And they call him later Seamus and Caca, James the Shit, or James the Turd. So that's what he's known as in Ireland. He's not held up in great reverence the way that William would be in Ulster. Certainly in the Protestant parts of Ulster. So, and in Scotland, of course. William then has basically, he has been taken by the people to their hearts, and he's proven this. We talked about the churches and stuff that he built in Londonderry. So, William advances very, very slowly because they're worried about this French navy. And first thing is that they want to do is they want to take Dublin, okay? The Jacobites are advancing back, but what they're doing are retreating back. What they're doing is retreating. The Duke of Berwick is put in charge of this scorched earth policy. So every time they retreat back, the towns, the fields, all the food around the area is destroyed, and the people move back. So this scorched earth policy is happening right through their whole retreat back towards Dublin and then towards Limerick. On the 2nd of July, Tyrconnell, the Irish commander-in-chief, basically puts a letter out to all his command that he wants the Irish army to reform at Limerick. So as soon as they can, they have to get to Limerick. As I say, the Irish army they're defeated at the Boyne, and their morale's dropped, but they're not decisively defeated, and they can reform again. Problem is, as they retreated, many of them left their weaponry behind them, and thousands of weapons are left in piles. So a lot of the men don't have weapons anymore, and they're going to have to be resupplied. William's plan is now basically that he needs to advance forward towards Dublin, okay? And the biggest obstacle in his advance basically will be this scorched earth policy. He needs to get food to the men, okay? But eventually they reach Dublin, and on the 7th of July they reach Dublin, and the Protestants within the city rejoice, and they put out orange flags and ribbons and stuff supporting William, because most of the people in Dublin at this time would be Protestant, okay? The next biggest obstacle then, you've taken Dublin, the next biggest place to take is Limerick. Limerick's a very old town, but it has great fortified positions. Very similar to Londonderry. It's the sort of key to taking the whole of Ireland, okay? It's a fortified town. Usually around about 12,000 people live in the city, and about 4,000 of that is garrison. So, but the problem is now the Jacobite main force is now amassing towards Limerick. The biggest obstacle to getting to Limerick is the River Shannon. If you've ever been to Ireland, you see the River Shannon, and it's one of the widest rivers in Europe, and it's extremely fast flowing. So it's very dangerous for men to cross the River Shannon. So William, he wants to branch out towards the west and towards the east as well. So the first thing to take in the west is Athlone. The problem with Athlone is it's surrounded by the river, and it is in a fortified. There is a fortified position within it, Athlone Castle or Athlone Fort, and the Jacobites have garrisoned this fairly well, and it's in a good defensible position. So William asks General Douglas, the Scottish general, who was involved in this flanking move at the Boyne, to take Athlone. So he gives him a large force of men, we don't know, probably around about 10,000, and asks them to advance towards the city. Well, sorry, the town of Athlone. Artillery amongst it, of course, artillery pieces, but the artillery pieces that are given to him are very small. They're not the big artillery pieces that are needed for sieges, okay? So they're 16-pounders, probably at the most. So they're not. There's no mortars or anything like that. Okay. So Douglas advances. William then wants to take the next town. Moving towards Limerick, he wants to take the eastern seaboard as well, and sort of keep that a safe place in case he does have to leave. So Wexford is the next place that is taken, and this is handed over to the command of Major General Percy Kirk to take this. Kirk, we all know about him at Londonderry. You know, some people say he sat in his bum while the people of Londonderry starved. But Kirk is now put in charge of this movement towards Wexford. Okay. The most of Leinster now is under Williamite command. Okay. Parliament now are putting pressure upon William. They're writing to him and telling him that he needs to come back to England. There is talk, of course, this rumour that the Dauphin of France is coming with 50,000 men to invade England, and he needs to be there to meet this force. William writes back saying there's no evidence of this, but he will think about this leaving Ireland to come back to England. The next place that needs to be taken, as I said, is Wexford. Kirk takes Wexford fairly easily. The officer in charge of Wexford is wanting to hold, but then he sees the 16 ships of Sir Cloudesley Shovel, the great Williamite admiral's fleet, coming towards the city, and he decides that he's going to come to terms with Kirk. So it's fairly simple. The next place is Duncannon. And Duncannon is being held by a very old Jacobite general called Burke. Burke had served in the Jacobite army, or the Irish Confederate army, against Oliver Cromwell. So this guy was an old campaigner. And again, he wants to hold out and wants to hold out. And then he sees, just off the coast, the Williamite fleet coming towards him. and he sees these massive gunships, and he decides, no, we're going to retire. So he retires as well. The Williamites have taken Wexford, and now they've taken Duncannon. So they have the whole of Leinster. William hands now the command of the advance over to Count Solms, his cousin, who was the commander, we know of the Dutch Blue Guard. We talked about him. Solms is a very cautious man, and he wants to know what's going on with the rest of the campaign. So Douglas is moving towards Athlone, and eventually he gets at Athlone, and on the 17th he sets up his artillery pieces, and they start bombarding the fortified position of Athlone. But as I say, these cannonballs are small cannonballs. This is probably the size of a cannonball that they would be firing, or slightly bigger, just a slightly bigger one. But to really put holes in walls, they need to be big. I mean, the size of basketballs, 32-pounders. This is an 8-pounder. And if it hits a wall, it's just going to bounce off it. Okay? If it hits people, different story. But if it hits a wall, it's going to bounce off it. So the cannons are firing, and this goes on for days and days and days. And the Jacobite commander in charge of Athlone's a man called Grace. Again, an old campaigner. A lot of the Jacobite commanders are old campaigners. He was actually at the siege of Drogheda and was one of the officers who survived the siege of Drogheda against Cromwell. He is asked to retreat and to surrender the town. And he says, no, I'm not going to surrender. In fact, we will fight to the very last man. We will basically fight until we have run out of food and out of powder, and even then we will not retreat. In fact, I will even eat my boots to give me some substance. So this is the sort of stuff that the Williamites are up against, these guys, these real hardcore Jacobites. They also, Grace is believing that he is going to be given a relief force coming from the main Jacobite force under Patrick Sarsfield. There's talk that Sarsfield is on his way with 15,000 men. It's not true. Sarsfield has been, Grace has wrote back to the Jacobite command asking for help, and the command have sent out men. Sarsfield is coming with around about 3,000 cavalry and a couple of thousand of infantry. So not 15,000, probably about 5,000 men. Unfortunately, these rumours get into the Williamite camp, and Douglas then panics, and he goes, well, we don't have enough men here to fight these guys, so we're going to have to basically retreat back towards the main command and see what they want us to do. So he writes back to the Williamite command, and then he strikes his camp. Basically, lift all the tents, lift all the guns, all the men, and get up, and then they start retreating back towards the main Williamite command. Sarsfield, as I say, is coming, but it's only a very small force. Okay, William doesn't see it as much of an annoyance. Athlone isn't the main objective. Limerick is the main objective. Solms and his men are marching forward very slowly, and as we say, the Duke of Berwick is doing a great job of this scorched earth policy. He's burning everything, poisoning wells, and making sure there's no food for the Williamites' advance. So the Williamites are having to really slow the advance, waiting for the food and the artillery train coming, along with them. But the Jacobites are not in much better order, to be honest. And the Jacobite army at Limerick, some of them don't have weapons. As we said, they've left their weapons. Brigadier Wanchop, who's a Scottish Jacobite, he remarks, and this is from Richard Docherty's book, about a regiment that he sees as Lord Graham Prior's regiment, one of the better Irish Jacobite regiments of the campaign. This regiment I found to consist of 150 men at arms. These arms were fixed. That means that they were ready to fire. There was 50 unfixed, so that means that their guns aren't worth anything. And they had 100 men without arms. It was a dismal and most shameful sight. The king had lost his army in less than a fortnight, and now we needed supply from our French allies. So basically, this is a Scottish Jacobite who's later puts in charge of the defence of Limerick. But One Shot is basically saying that the Jacobite soldiers, some of them don't have weapons, and some of the weapons that they do have don't work. Okay, they haven't looked after them properly. So the French are going to have to resupply them, or they're going to be defeated, basically. So there's a massive amount of infighting goes on within the Jacobite command. The Tyrconnell and the French officers, they want to come to terms with the Williamites. The Irish under Sarsfield and the rest of the Irish commanders, they don't want this. They want to fight on. They want to fight to the last man, and some of them say. So the Jacobite commanders look around and say Sarsfield is looked upon as the man who represents the Irish, and Tyrconnell and Lausanne represent the French. So there's a bit of a split in the Jacobite command at this point. They also know that William's coming, and some of them believe that William has an army of 50,000 men marching towards him, because they believe more troops have been brought in from the mainland. It's not true. William still has the same army from the Boyne advancing towards him. Limerick is in a position the same as Londonderry. It's a very old fortification, okay, and it hasn't been looked after properly. A lot of the walls are crumbling, and basically the Jacobite command, they hand over the garrison to the French soldiers under Lausanne, and nothing is done to the city. Okay, they just feel that the French being there is enough to hold back the Williamites. But Lausanne, he has a problem. He looks around the city, he looks at the defences, and he doesn't see it as defendable. He then takes his men out, and he forms them up, and he marches them towards Galway. He sees Galway as a better place to defend. Galway also is an easier place for the fleet to rescue his men and take them back to France. Remember, Lausanne has got special orders from Louis XIV to keep his men away from the harm. Okay? So the Jacobite command then is handed over to One Shot. One Shot is put in charge of the defences of the city, and he starts to strengthen the city. He starts to dig defensive pits, and he also puts a moat around the city as well. So he brings in engineers, and he starts to really try and get the city ready for this siege that is coming. Tyrconnell, he's in the same situation as what Governor Lundy was in Londonderry. He sees this position as nearly undefendable, and there's all this infighting that's going on. He's stuck between a rock and a hard place. The Irish command and officers, they meet with Tyrconnell and meet with the French, and they say, look, we hold Limerick, we hold Cork, we hold Kinsale, but we also, in the west, we also hold Galway, and we hold Sligo. So, we're holding the main positions here. If we can hold these positions, we've no problems, especially if French troops are coming as well, because they believe that the French are going to send more men. The Bossulo, who's a French officer within James's command, he becomes the governor of the city of Limerick. And as I say, One Shot is doing his best to strengthen the city. William then writes to Douglas. Douglas has not been able to take Athlone. Athlone is under this, these cannonballs are hitting the city, and they're killing people, but it's not doing what it's meant to do. And as I say, the man in charge of Athlone, Grace, says that he would rather eat his shoes and retire. So this is the problem. They're stuck. They're really, really stuck. And Douglas, as I said, has left, and he's restruck his camp. So now William says to Douglas, look, don't worry about Athlone. It'll come. Once we take Limerick, it'll fall. I want you to take Mullingar. So he's asked to take Mullingar with his force. Berwick is doing such a great job. We talked about this scorched earth. And there's no food, there's no clean water, there's nothing about. The Williamites are really struggling, okay? The movement towards Limerick is so slow. It's so slow. The Jacobites have heard from a Williamite deserter that William's artillery train is on its way. So this is the big guns, okay? These are the siege guns that are going to destroy Limerick. They have a meeting with the command, and Sarsfield basically says, look, I can take a group of cavalry and I can break into this Williamite line and I can destroy their artillery. He says, give me a small troop of men, light horses, and we can get there. So 600 troopers guided by a rapparee. The rapparees we talked about, these are like the brigands, the sort of irregular horse, okay? These guys are not part of the Jacobite army as such, but they're fighting basically for money, okay? They're mercenaries. So this Jacobite rapparee called Galloping Hogan, he leads Sarsfield's cavalry through the mountainous area of Galway towards the Williamite artillery. The Williamite artillery train is so slow. In one account, it says that they were so heavy that the ground that they came through was liquefied. So it basically, you've got these heavy guns, over 3 tons per gun, okay, some of them are, and they're just liquefying the ground around them. So it becomes a bog, and some of the men are actually falling into this, and there is a count that some actually died in this advance. So the Williamite artillery train is so slow, and it's taken weeks for it to get to where it is. And eventually they stop for the night at a place called Ballyneety. And during the midnight, Sarsfield's scouts eventually they see the camp and they see the lights. And Sarsfield leads the cavalry attack into the middle of this. And to be fair, this is probably the biggest victory of the Jacobites in the whole of the Williamite Wars. Sarsfield leads the cavalry in and they take out the Williamites with the swords. And they kill around about 200 people of the artillery train. The artillery train are not properly guarded. Williamites should have detached cavalry and infantry to them, but they don't. They have a small detachment of dragoons and it's not enough. So William, he hears about this attack. Sarsfield, what they do is they break in, they destroy as much as they can. Over 3 tons of gunpowder is destroyed. And they try and destroy all the guns, but all they can do is destroy 2 guns. So they put gunpowder down the barrels and they blow these guns up and the barrels split and they can't be used anymore as cannon. So they have done a lot in one night. They've destroyed the artillery train's powder supply. They've destroyed some of the food, some of the provisions that are coming along with the artillery train, because they were not just bringing guns and powder, they're also bringing flour and food to the Williamite troops. So they've a massive attack when it comes to the morale, and the Jacobite morale is raised so much by this. And this is where Sarsfield becomes this great hero in Jacobite history. Other than that, in the war, he doesn't do very much more, to be honest. We'll talk about what he does at Aughrim later on. But here, at this point, the Jacobite morale is high because they've taken the Williamite artillery train. They've killed 200 men. They've taken money from the Williamite train as well, but they've also destroyed 2 guns. Now, it's not a massive setback for the Williamites. They can send for new guns fairly quickly. It would probably take another 2 weeks for the guns to come, but it's not going to set back William's overall command towards Limerick. So William and his men advance towards Limerick. William also is still having his comfort in the field. It is mentioned in Richard Docherty's book. It's mentioned in John Childs' book that the Williamite soldiers, they still see William as this great hero, but William wants his comfort, and it says about his little house. I just find it here. Yes, here's it here. So William, is moving towards the Jacobites and moving towards Limerick. But 2 regiments of his Dutch Blue Guard, they camp for the night and they light a bonfire. Then de Mossier, who was a Huguenot officer, he says that he sees this little thing being erected, and this is the little house that we talked about Sir Christopher Wren has built. And this is the exact words he says. I was fascinated to see this little house in the shape of a tent that could be dismounted and put on a cart. It had a bed and medicine chests inside. The king was also looked after by a servant. This man was a blackamoor. That means that he was of African descent. Okay, so William basically is still in the field with his men. He's been asked by Parliament to come back, but he's resisting. He wants to see Limerick taken. He really wants to see Limerick taken. Okay, so he advances very slowly towards Limerick, and we're into August now. So July's gone. We're into August. So the Williamites are advancing very slowly towards Limerick. William is with them. Count Solms is in charge of the advance, yes, but William is with them as well. So the king is advancing along with his men, very slowly. But they're taking these towns. The problem is, as we said, every time they take a position, they have to garrison this position. Okay? So the Williamite command, the Williamite men and the men under their command, they're getting fewer and fewer, and they need to try and bring some more men in as well. William is still worried about this whole rumour that the Dauphin is coming to take England. So he's worried about this as well. So there's so many things going on. And their guns have been destroyed at Ballyneety. The Jacobites they're overjoyed. Sarsfield and these 600 men have taken the Williamite train and they've given them an awful bloody nose. Yes, that's true. That is true. You have to give Sarsfield and the whole plan, you have to give them it. They did. They give the Williamites a very bloody nose. But does it stop the Williamites' advance? Will it stop the Williamites from taking Limerick? We'll find out. We'll find out next week, because this is the end of this talk, friends. We also next week will talk about the other part of the Scottish campaign, okay? And people have said to me, oh, what about this that happened in Scotland and this happened in Scotland? Scotland by this point is really quite, we talked about it. After Dunkeld and the Williamites bringing in more and more troops into Scotland, the Scottish Jacobites sort of melt away for a while. Okay, they will come back, and we will talk about it next week at Cromdale. Okay, but basically that's the end of my talk today, friends. The books that I've used, once again, we always talk about our books. So the books that I've used, this one here is the Battle of the Boyne by Pádraig Lennon, friend of mine, Irish historian. The other one that we used, Richard Docherty, the Williamite War in Ireland. The other ones that we used is the Battle of the Boyne by Mike McNally, superb book, good friend of mine as well. The other one, Matthew Glosier, the Huguenot Soldiers in Ireland. A lot of good individual things. And the other one, which you probably haven't seen yet, is this one here. This is the Battlefield Guide of the Battle of the Boyne by Harman Murtagh. From a Jacobite's point of view, but a very interesting point of view as well.